The year is 2018. The global trade landscape is in turmoil. At the heart of the storm stands the United States, led by President Donald Trump, a man who views trade not as a force for cooperation, but as a zero-sum game. His weapon of choice? Tariffs. With a stroke of a pen, he unleashes a wave of protectionist measures targeting allies and adversaries alike. Among the hardest hit is Canada, America's northern neighbor and close economic partner. The tariffs, primarily aimed at steel and aluminum imports, send shockwaves through the Canadian economy, straining the historically strong bond between the two nations. This is the story of Trump's tariff shock, Canada's reaction, and the potential long-term consequences for the North American economy. In March 2018, President Trump dropped a bombshell on the global trade community. His announcement was unexpected and sent ripples through international markets and political circles alike. Citing national security concerns, he announced the imposition of hefty tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. This move was part of his broader agenda to prioritize American industries and reduce the trade deficit. The tariffs, 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum, sent shockwaves through the global market, particularly impacting close U.S. allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. These countries were significant exporters of these metals to the United States, and the tariffs threatened to disrupt established trade relationships. Trump's rationale for the tariffs was rooted in the notion that surging imports of these metals posed a threat to U.S. national security, weakening domestic industries vital to defense. He argued that a strong domestic steel and aluminum industry was essential for the country's defense capabilities. He invoked Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, a rarely used provision allowing for such action to protect national security interests. This legal maneuver gave the president broad authority to adjust imports if they were deemed a threat to national security. The move was met with immediate criticism from trade partners and experts alike. Critics argued that the tariffs would lead to higher costs for American consumers and businesses, potentially sparking a trade war. Many argued that the national security justification rang hollow, particularly given that Canada, the largest exporter of steel to the U.S., was also a staunch NATO ally. The tariffs strained relations with key allies and raised questions about the true motivations behind the policy. The tariffs were widely seen as a protectionist measure designed to shield U.S. industries from competition, even if it meant straining relationships with key allies and disrupting global supply chains. The long-term impact of these tariffs on the global economy and international relations remains a topic of intense debate. Canada, caught off guard by the sudden announcement, responded with a mix of disappointment and defiance. The news sent shockwaves through the political and economic landscape, prompting immediate discussions and emergency meetings among Canadian officials. The sudden imposition of tariffs by the United States was seen not just as an economic challenge, but as a direct affront to the long-standing partnership between the two nations. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau denounced the tariffs as unacceptable and insulting, emphasizing the close security and economic ties between the two countries. He highlighted the shared history and mutual benefits that had been cultivated over decades, stressing that such actions undermined the spirit of cooperation that had always defined the Canada-US relationship. While acknowledging the need to protect Canadian interests, Trudeau initially sought to avoid an escalating trade war. Canada's response was two-pronged. On one hand, there was a clear need to stand firm and protect national interests, but on the other, there was a desire to maintain the broader relationship and avoid further economic damage. This delicate balancing act required careful consideration and strategic planning. Firstly, it announced retaliatory tariffs on a range of U.S. goods, carefully chosen to exert pressure on U.S. industries while minimizing harm to Canadian consumers. The selection of these goods was not arbitrary. It was a calculated move designed to send a clear message without causing undue hardship to Canadian businesses and families. These countermeasures targeted products like steel, aluminum, but also consumer goods like orange juice, ketchup, and whiskey, aiming to hit politically sensitive sectors in the U.S. By focusing on these specific items, Canada hoped to create enough economic discomfort to prompt a reconsideration of the tariffs, while also rallying domestic support for the government's actions. Secondly, Canada launched a concerted diplomatic offensive, engaging with U.S. officials, industry representatives, and lawmakers to highlight the integrated nature of the North American economy and the potential harm that tariffs would inflict on both sides of the border. This diplomatic effort was aimed at building alliances and finding common ground, emphasizing that the economic well-being of both nations was deeply intertwined. By fostering dialogue and understanding, Canada sought to mitigate the impact of the tariffs and pave the way for a more collaborative future. Section 4, Collateral Damage, Economic Impacts on U.S. and Canadian Industries. The tariffs, as predicted, sent ripples of disruption through both the U.S. and Canadian economies. In the U.S., while some domestic steel and aluminum producers experienced a short-lived boost, other industries reliant on these metals as inputs faced increased costs. Manufacturers of automobiles, appliances, and construction materials found themselves squeezed by rising prices, eroding their competitiveness and threatening jobs. In Canada, the impact was even more pronounced. Steel and aluminum producers, heavily integrated with their U.S. counterparts, faced the brunt of the tariffs. Job losses were reported in key manufacturing hubs like Ontario and Quebec. The tariffs also disrupted established supply chains, forcing businesses to scramble for alternative sources of materials, often at higher prices. Section 5. The consumer crunch, rising prices, and the looming threat of inflation. The tariffs' effects were not confined to the factory floor. Consumers on both sides of the border began to feel the pinch as the increased costs of production translated into higher prices for a wide range of goods. In the U.S., everyday items like cars, appliances, beer, and soft drinks saw price hikes. The price of aluminum baseball bats even went up, much to the chagrin of Little League players and their parents. In Canada, the tariffs added fuel to the fire of already rising housing costs. Steel and aluminum are essential components in construction, and the tariffs contributed to escalating prices for building materials. This, coupled with rising interest rates, further exacerbated the affordability crisis in Canada's major cities, impacting homebuyers and renters alike. Section 6. Political machinations, tariffs as a tool for domestic gain. The timing of Trump's tariff announcement, just months before the 2018 U.S. midterm elections, raised eyebrows and fueled speculation about the political motivations behind the move. Trump had campaigned on a promise to protect American jobs and industries, and the tariffs, regardless of their economic wisdom, played well with his base in industrial states hit hard by globalization and job losses. The tariffs were also seen by some as a tactic to strengthen Trump's hand in ongoing trade negotiations, particularly with Canada and Mexico, regarding the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. By creating a sense of crisis and economic uncertainty, Trump may have calculated that he could extract concessions from his NAFTA partners, eager to avoid a full-blown trade war. Section 7. Seeking exemption, navigating the labyrinth of trade negotiations. As the trade dispute dragged on, Canada found itself engaged in a delicate balancing act. The stakes were high, and the path forward was anything but clear. Each decision had to be weighed carefully, considering both immediate impacts and long-term consequences. On the one hand, it needed to stand firm in defense of its interests, and demonstrate to its citizens that it would not be bullied by its powerful neighbor. Public sentiment was strong, and the government had to show resolve and strength. On the other hand, it had to avoid escalating the conflict into a full-blown trade war, which would have devastating consequences for both economies. The potential for job losses, economic downturns, and strained international relations loomed large. Canada pursued a multi-pronged strategy. This approach required coordination across various levels of government and industry, ensuring that all stakeholders were aligned and working towards a common goal. It challenged the tariffs at the World Trade Organization, arguing that they violated international trade rules. This legal avenue was crucial, as it provided a formal platform to contest the measures and seek redress. It also sought to secure exemptions from the tariffs, highlighting the integrated nature of the North American steel and aluminum industries. The interconnected supply chains meant that tariffs would hurt not just Canadian businesses, but also American manufacturers relying on Canadian materials. Additionally, it emphasized the fact that Canadian metal often ended up in U.S. military equipment. This argument underscored the strategic importance of maintaining a seamless flow of materials between the two countries, especially for national security. At the same time, Canada continued to engage in negotiations with the U.S., seeking a negotiated solution that would address both countries' concerns. These talks were complex and required patience, diplomacy, and a willingness to find common ground. The goal was to reach an agreement that would not only resolve the immediate dispute, but also strengthen the long-term trade relationship between the two nations.